Hi everyone, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's online session on sustainable future. My name is Threem and I'm here from Startup Disrupt. We aim to build a global community of startup founders, innovators, and like-minded people to connect, learn, and grow together. We organize many community events throughout the year, and apart from that, we also offer mentorship schemes to help founders and startups to accelerate. So without any further ado, we have an exciting panel discussion ahead of us. I am very thrilled to bring you an amazing speakers from various industries to discuss the topic that matters today and in the future. We hope you'll enjoy today's events. Now, I'd like to welcome Patricia Silva from Green Angel Syndicate. She's going to be our moderator for tonight. So Patricia, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Tui. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I'm going to be the moderator for this event, as Tui mentioned. And just a quick intro of myself. At the Green Angel Syndicate, I lead with the whole deal flow management. So basically, I get all the amazing startups that focus on climate and sustainability and get to know about them. So yeah, I've been doing this for the past years, working on financing startups, and that's the part I love. And before that, I work in a number of different sustainability projects, from renewable energy to sustainable construction and many more. But now I would like to invite to the stage the speakers of today. So it'd be great to hear from all of you. The first question I ask you is to please introduce yourselves, each of you. And I would like to also know what does sustainability mean for you personally, so beyond your work. Martina, would you like to start?
Hi everyone, lovely to meet you all. So I am the Climate Action Lead at Arrival, which is a technology and automotive company working towards volume production of fully electric commercial vehicles, so a bus and a van. And outside of work, sustainability is really truly personal for me. One thing that I think has been constant in my life is the fact that I want to have children eventually. And I feel as though that is a little bit hanging in the balance for me at the moment, because I look to the future and I am seriously optimistic, but there's also lots of uncertainty around our changing climate and what we're acting on at the moment. So yeah, I'm working, my job and my personal life interact, and I'm working to make sure that companies like Arrival are really changing the world and reducing carbon emissions.
Thank you, Martina. Carl, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks for letting me be part of such an esteemed panel. I work for a company called ClearlySo, and we are an impact and sustainability focused corporate finance advisor. So we work with high growth businesses, helping them raise anywhere from £3 to £5 million or euros up to £20 million or euros plus. Based in London, but with a pan-European investor network. Sustainability for me is more than just doing my best to mitigate the effects of climate change. I try to take a holistic view on it. It's about thinking about what supply chains look like behind the products that I'm buying, trying to minimize the amount of plastic that I'm using, etc., etc. So for me it's a broad thing, and it would take too long to go into detail about it.
Thanks, Carl. Julie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thanks very much for having me. My name's Julie Ames. I'm a senior software engineer at Octopus Energy. Octopus Energy is a UK energy provider, and we're increasingly bringing renewable energy not just to the UK but across the world. And sustainability for me it's really been about resetting our view of like how we interact with the world, how our economy interacts with the world, how we look at the resources at our disposal and sort of start to reframe the discussion around, we have this limited planet, we have this limited resources, how can we exist in that in a sustainable way?
Thanks, Julie. Now over to you, Scott.
Hello, yep. So I'm founder of Well, That's Interesting.tech. For me, sustainability, there's definitely a children element there. I've got 4 children, so for me, it's really thinking about their future. And it's also helping them challenge things, question, and make sure they're asking questions about the things that they're doing, and make them more aware of the choices they make.
Thanks, Scott. And last but not the least, Ian.
Hello, everyone. My name's Ian Cabey. I'm head of tech for good for BT Group, a telecommunications company based in the UK. My particular role is about embedding tech that enables climate action within our products and services at BT. And I think on the sustainability from a personal point of view, I often struggle to separate my work and personal life from a sustainable perspective. But often, if I'm honest, I find it easier to be more sustainable at work and drive action at work rather than at home. I'm looking at my car sometimes thinking that could be a lot more efficient. But I think, yeah, definitely, echoing Scott and Martina, I think it's about really just doing my bit to ensure that leaving the planet in a little better place than it is now.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Well, looks like there's a common thread, of course, here that your personal sustainability is usually touched by what you do daily. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. How we're going to go about it today is I'm going to ask a few questions to each of you, and then we open up to later on to more open-ended questions as well. And for whoever is listening to us, feel free to ask any questions on Sli.do. Again, we can integrate them as we go by, so feel free to interact with the panelists. And well, we're talking about mobility a few times here, so let's start with that. And we have Martina here, again, climate action lead at Arrival, so you can definitely tell us more about the mobility, smart cities, how that is done in a sustainable way. So yes, please tell us more about Arrival's use of technology to bring all those electric vehicles to our cities, to our current cities.
Of course, yeah. And one of the things I really love about Arrival is its founding story. So our founder, Dennis, is the founder of a tech entrepreneur and the founder of a previous telecommunications business. And in 2015, he was in London and he was faced with the busy, noisy, polluted streets. And he could just couldn't see why this was the case, because if you look at telecoms, then you've got a completely unrecognizable life almost. If you think back to 2007, when I think the invention of the first iPhone, and our lives are pretty unrecognizable now. We're carrying incredible computers in our pockets around all day, and he just couldn't see that innovation that was needed in the automotive industry. So it desperately needed a shake-up, and he decided that he was going to be the one to do it. So yeah, he's looking, and Arrival now as a business are looking to accelerate the evolution of transport, or the revolution of transport, at the rate that humanity and the planet require. And we're working to produce 2 products in volume by next year. An electric van in partnership with UPS, an electric bus being trialled by First Bus later this year. And we're also super excited that we announced the Arrival car, designed for the needs of ride-hailing drivers, working with Uber. And yeah, so while we're producing vehicles, we're first and foremost a tech company. So we're utilizing that technology to really reinvent the automotive industry. So that tech mindset, that deep technology feeds into absolutely everything we do. So vehicles are designed to be robotically assembled, which is quite a challenge in small footprint, low capex microfactories, and they're placed in the markets that these vehicles will serve. And we've vertically integrated many of our components and use a grid-based architecture, which enables that microfactory approach, but also you can see where the software hardware kind of links together. So that's really where tech is driving that change. It's allowing us to place our microfactories local to where they're needed, local to where the vehicles are needed, and really great vehicles to drive for the drivers, for the cities, and for the people using them. That's a little bit of insight on how Arrival is using technology to really change the mobility and transport industry.
Great, Martina, thank you. I also like the point that you mentioned that you focus on e-van and e-buses and eventually e-cars, but more for the ride-hailing industry. As many of you might know, cars, like individual cars, are used about 3% of the time. They're there, so they idle 97% of the time. So if you can maximize the use of the cars, the more you're doing for the world, because eventually you need less cars for more people. So that's great to know that, Martina. And I'd be curious to know, like, given your job at Arrival, how do you advise Arrival on their sustainability journey? Like, what do you take into account? What they should be taking into account? What are the goals? How are they measured? It'd be great to know a bit more about that as well.
Yeah, of course. So we look at what we call a principle of mindful sustainability, and under that there's 3 pillars. So we want to create a clean, circular and equitable transport system for everyone. So I'll break those down. If we look at clean cities are those where people and goods are transported in low emissions vehicles, low air pollution. And those vehicles need to be designed for the challenges that we have today. So facing up to a climate emergency by measuring and minimizing all the impacts of the vehicle using life cycle assessment. So one of those areas that people don't immediately jump to is energy. And I'm sure Julie will take us through that in due course. And that's using life cycle assessment is not just a thing that we do to measure at the end of the design process. It's fed in us right from the beginning. So we're looking at minimizing emissions right from the very beginning, where designs are drawn and decisions are made. So we don't almost lock ourselves into impactful tech right from the start that we have to then get out of. So yeah, really, really cool stuff there. And yeah, so the materials that we use as well, they're always going to have some kind of environmental impact. And one of the key areas that we look at, our second pillar, is circularity. So under our circularity pillar, so the circular economy, kind of using what you've got, recycling, making the kind of economy circular. I like the term circular economy, but I often think that it's kind of a fancier term for reduce, reuse, and recycle. So looking at that, we reduce the impact of vehicles, and we actually look at how we can design our vehicles in a modular way. And that means that when something happens, if there's an upgrade in technology, we can swap out some modules and upgrade our vehicles, keep them on the road for as long as possible. So that's a key area of reduce. We're looking to make our vehicles fully recyclable. One example of this is using our composite body, which comes with, the risk of composite materials means that they can sometimes be hard to recycle, but we know exactly how we're recycling them, and in the process of taking all of those offcuts and recycling them into a really high grade material for use elsewhere in the vehicle. And then we also look at again, to reduce, our vehicles are so configurable that when you have if you take, for example, a van doing some inner city driving, it might only do 50 kilometers. And sizing a battery for 200 kilometers for that use case just makes no sense, because you're almost carrying around the battery like a passenger. So if you can reduce the battery capacity just by taking a few modules out, you can really reduce that impact of the vehicle. So that's why we look at circularity. And finally, we do all of this with equity in mind. So vehicles designed for a whole range of users, and ensuring transportation is provided where it kind of really is needed. And then if you look to the microfactory approach, we localize all our supply chains, providing work for local talent and uplift for those local communities.
Wow, that's amazing, actually, Martina, to see that Arrival is not just an EV company. You're really walking the talk in terms of everything you're doing, in terms of making your vehicles way more sustainable than any others EVs that are out there. So it's great to know that. And actually, now that we're speaking about EVs, and there's other supporting rules for EVs that need to be in place for them to really make a difference on climate. And that will be the support of charging stations, and eventually also a cleaner grid powered by renewable energy, because if it's powered by coal, there's not much that we're reducing and making a good thing for the planet. So on that segue, I'd love to hear from Julie to know more about what Octopus is doing in this space, not only at providing better renewable energy tariffs for your customers, but also with respect to the EVs.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yeah, this is exactly kind of what Octopus is all about, because, and I identify such a lot with what a lot of Martina said around us being a tech company first and needing to fix an industry, because we very much kind of came into this saying we need to fix the customer service element, we need to fix the renewable element, and we also need to make this something that everybody can access, everybody can use, everybody can afford. And EVs in themselves provide a massive opportunity, as you say, because you've got to have a renewable source of power. But not just that, you've also got to make sure that we've got the capacity to get that power around. So you've got the difference between people being able to use their energy locally as much as possible, to be able to have their renewable energy generated locally as much as possible. And all these things present this kind of very big challenge for the existing energy infrastructure that we've got. So a few of the ways that Octopus is trying to tackle this kind of big opportunity is, first of all, the tariffs. We've got the Octopus Go tariff. That's our kind of standard EV tariff, where you just get a few hours overnight, enough to charge up your EV to full. And what that means is that if you just put off that charging from when you get home, you get home from work, you're making a dinner, this has like a large peak in energy usage happens around this time. And that's no good for sustainability, because we have to turn on coal power in order to meet a large peak. We can't ask the sun to shine more or the wind to blow more. But luckily the wind blows a lot overnight. So if we encourage people to use that energy then, it'll be greener, and it'll mean that we also won't have to add like a massive capacity to charge 2 million, 3 million EVs across the country during the peak. That would present a massive kind of infrastructure issue. So there are great kind of tech solutions to like a lot of these problems. And that's kind of, I think, a lot of what we were talking about before is sort of saying, like, how do we look at the world as is and work around the kind of more fundamental things if we can't turn up renewable energy when we need to. The other ways, like in terms of making this accessible to people, we've also tried to make sure that people can charge where they need to be able to charge. So a common challenge with EVs is, there's a nervousness of where can I charge my EV if I'm traveling. It's something that, you're never worried about being able to find a petrol station. They're only kind of in every motorway. But making it seamless, that, just as easy to be able to charge your electric vehicle is vital to kind of get people uptaking this offering. So we've created a network of charge points kind of all across the country, where you can use one card across all the different charging networks and you get billed monthly. So it's that kind of customer experience, designing with real people in mind, that is kind of part of the Octopus offering. And we've even kind of gone further and started looking at more data-driven and machine learning driven offerings. So we've got some projects called Power Loop and the Tesla Energy Plan. And these are all around unlocking kind of smarter load shifting and local generation. So imagine if you have a house where you've got your Tesla Powerwall, you've got your Tesla EV, and you've got your solar panels, and if you can hand off the load control to a machine learning algorithm and let that charge up your battery at the time when it's greenest, and you can sell that energy back to the grid, or you can use it to charge your car. And that, as much as possible, keeps the distance that these green electrons need to travel in order to get around to a minimum. So it's the same thing that's at the heart of all of these things, reducing kind of how much you need to use, reducing how far it needs to go, and just making it do as much as it can kind of in the space. And not to mention, we also run an EV leasing company as Octopus Energy electric vehicles. So we're right across this whole space, trying to make it kind of cheaper and easier and just more enjoyable and better for the planet to own an EV.
Great, really great to know. And there's so many things that Octopus Energy is doing. And you lightly touched the part of customer care service and how technology is helping you providing more customer care service, because we have sustainability, we have sustainable offerings, but at the same time we want to be serving the others the best way we can. So really, I don't know, because you also just touched it, but I'd be curious to know more about how technology is helping you providing a great customer service. From the reviews I see it out there, you're on the top, so it'd be great to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So because we are building all of our own technology, like from the ground up, we can use it to support our aims. So something that we did, like I was very lucky to join Octopus really early on. And I remember when we said, okay, we need to split the operations teams into smaller teams so that they can look after customers over the whole life cycle of an account. And that means that when you call Octopus Energy, you'll speak to the same team of 5 or 6 people. You won't get passed from department to department. And it's the sort of thing that when we build our own telephony, when we build our own kind of back-end system, we can enable this sort of change. And it's the same technology that enables people to really get to know the breadth of the things that you'd have to deal with an account. You don't have individual specialists looking after move outs, looking after kind of people being onboarded. So it provides a much more satisfying kind of breadth of challenges in your career. And it also means that when lockdown came, we were one of the only suppliers providing the same level of service day in, day out over lockdown, with people able to just work from their homes, no problem, no questions asked, all enabled by our existing technology. So looking after customers has just been absolutely fundamental to everything we've done. We also have had like a really strong focus from the beginning on accessibility. So Ash, who's the head of front-end development, he's literally written the book on accessibility. He's involved in accessibility groups with kind of other large companies, and we focus on that in our website, in our bills. We also just try and make our data as accessible as possible. So we've created third-party APIs for people to build independent, like great third-party products. And we can try and bring it back to the customer sort of as much as possible. So even if it's just little things, trying to treat the energy industry as a service business and kind of making sure that we have that same level of experience you'd expect from other great service businesses. So little things like spinning the wheel of fortune when you submit your meter readings, just things that we can do, that we can offer, because we have that sort of control and that customization. Yeah.
So great, Jilly. Great to know about that. Again, not looking at just your core service, but also being able to provide a full end-to-end experience to your customers. So that's great to know about all that development at Octopus and the goal. And we have a question from the audience to you, Jilly. And the question is, what are Octopus sustainability metrics?
Sustainability metrics. So I think the ones that we've been really looking at and really focusing on recently has been around generation, trying to match our customer numbers with real-time electricity generation right here in the UK, or even as slightly abroad in France, I think it is. So we've recently absorbed the Octopus group. The Octopus Renewables Group, and that actually has, I think, oversight of, it was 2,800 megawatts of renewable energy, which is enough to power 1.2 million households. So it's those sort of projects. We've also, I think, bought our first 2 turbines, and these are the number 1 and number 2 fans, and we're using those to create sustainable local energy tariffs in Wales. And in another location. And what those tariffs do is they give you a 20% discount on a tariff when the turbine is running, which is about 98% of the time, and then a 50% discount on your tariff when the wind is really blowing and there's a lot of excess energy kind of on the grid. So our metrics are how can we grow in a way that brings renewable energy closer and closer to our business, and how can we connect in other businesses that align with these goals. So electric vehicles was one of the really early ones, but we're also increasingly looking at electrification of heating, so heat pumps as opposed to boilers. And we're also looking at green hydrogen as well, so trying to bring sustainability to industries like aviation and heavy goods vehicles, where electrification is perhaps a little harder to achieve.
Great, good goals, good measures. And I think also touching that, I'll ask you a last question for now, which is, well, how does Octopus ensure that trilemma of affordable, green and reliable energy for all? I think you replied to a lot of it. I'm not sure if you want to add something else, but it looks like you're very much focused on this. So it would be great to know how are you getting that besides the topics that you just mentioned, the areas you just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. It's at the end of the day, it's all underpinned by the technology. So Octopus Energy was some of the first UK and world time of use tariffs. So trying to directly connect consumers with how much energy costs throughout the day, and trying to provide this price signaling to let them load shift out of that both kind of expensive peak and unenvironmental peak. So I think the Agile tariff was the first to give you kind of different half-hourly pricing throughout the day. And what we've managed to find is that 28% of the consumption of people on our energy of our Agile tariff has managed to shift out of that peak period. So this price signaling really does work, and it really does kind of give that little nudge to people to make the greener choice. We're looking at other ways to do that as well, but it's also about taking this to businesses. So we have a vertical power tariff, which is designed around sustainable farming. So it lets businesses who also need to consume a lot of energy do that in the most environmental way. So it all comes back to allowing people to take advantage of kind of on-demand pricing, local generation, and shift your load into kind of greener areas.
Great, it's good to know, Julie. Thank you. And it's crazy how time goes by fast. We're almost at half the hour. So I'm going to move on and pass on the mic to Ian at this time. And I'm very curious, Ian, about a lot of things at BT Group. And first of all, like the first one would be, how can a telecoms business become more sustainable at its essence? So not only how you're delivering your service, but also at your own operations. So I'd be curious to hear more about it.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head in the sense that we've got an opportunity as to how we obviously have to decarbonize our own business to support climate action. But the other part of being a telecommunications company is the fact that the networks we provide, the products and services we provide can really enable a lot of climate action, support people in their net zero transition. So within the business, that those two elements really fulfill a lot of what we do with the sustainability team. And I think what's important, if you think about from how we're looking to reduce our own carbon footprint, what's been critical over the years is the fact that we have always been focusing on science-based targets since 2008. So, and we've been measuring our carbon footprint since 1992. So it's kind of luckily been in the business DNA for a number of years in terms of taking this climate action. And I think, when it came to setting a 1.5 degree aligned target back in 2016, that meant we had to reduce our intensity of our operations by 87% by 2030. And I think that having those targets in place, having that also brought in at board level and challenged by the board to achieve these targets actually drives action in this space. And again, in 2018, we were one of the first FTSE 100 companies to set a net zero target by 2045. So that having the targets in place really drives action and ensuring that that this is this board level bought into, this is all published and reported on an annual basis. And what that means though is, for example, by having the targets in place, it means you have to perform. So, for example, just back in the last year, we announced that we were now 100% renewable worldwide. Although a lot of BT's business is based in the UK, we do have operations elsewhere across the world supporting our multinational companies. But that's been a very big mission in terms of achieving 100% renewable worldwide. Also on the EV point, again, as a company building networks, maintaining networks, BT and Openreach in the UK actually has the second largest commercial fleet, so just behind Royal Mail. So we are, again, to points around EV transition, for us, it's integral to our business. We aim to be transition to EV vehicles by 2030. And that doesn't give us a long time, really, if you think about the fact that that's 9 years to transition 28,000 vehicles plus. And at the same time, there are challenges in the market at the moment in terms of, supply of vehicles, the design of vehicles to suit what we need as a business is another challenge that they're working with. But again, what's important here, and I think hopefully it sort of comes out across other elements of the sort of discussion today, is that collaboration is key. to do this. That we're working with the UK Electric Fleet Coalition, we're working with energy providers, we're working with manufacturers as part of this whole system. So, I think a lot of the challenges we all face as businesses can be solved by working together. So I think this is really, really important as a key message for people out there in terms of driving action. And in addition to that, we also have to consider, how we decarbonize our buildings, because again, a company like ours has a number of exchanges, a number of buildings. So again, how we work to reduce our energy supply and the efficiency of our buildings. And I think what's interesting is that actually, obviously, when we're looking at energy efficiency and those types of things, obviously it ends up being good for business as well. So we end up making a savings through being more energy efficient. So again, it helps the bottom line transaction in that space. So that's kind of looking at it from a kind of what we do internally, but what's potentially more exciting is the fact that with 5G, fiber, etc., that really the networks we're building really can provide a platform for innovation, for new ways to harness technology to help climate action. And this has been happening already in the sense that our products that we sell, such as Zoom, Teams, etc., that has been climate action. But one of the particular things I work on personally is actually looking at how we can look to partner with new scale-up companies as a business to actually support net zero transition. And last year we launched a activity called the Green Tech Innovation Platform, where we have been scouting with a company called Plug and Play, who we work with across all our scouting activities. And what we've found and embedded is 2 new companies into our business who can help public sector customers transition net zero. One of them is a Glasgow-based scale-up called IOPT, who have a social housing IoT solution, which really reduces preventative maintenance costs and also is very good at sort of supporting tenants on their fuel poverty. And the other part, a French startup called Ever Impact, who are looking at how we can use air quality and CO2 monitoring within cities to actually help also climate finance as well. So 2 very interesting companies we work with there. And I think this is part of what we need to do more and more is to find types of innovations and companies that can help our customers on their own transition and supporting our own net zero transition.
Oh, yeah, and you're super comprehensive. I very much liked your long and comprehensive answer. Like, it looks like BT Group is way ahead of many other corporates. You mentioned that you're measuring emissions since 1992, so that's a big thing. And it's great also to know that you are based on science-based targets, and eventually you get to your net zero goals. And you're one of the first companies doing that as well in the UK that is large corporates. And one thing that I enjoyed a lot also hearing from you is that you're doing that at the operations level as well, of course, and how your business helps transition to a more sustainable economy, again, because of all the telecoms and everything else. So great to hear from you. Great to know about all these initiatives, internal initiatives, and how you can help move other corporates and other businesses and everyone individually at their households as well. To become more sustainable, and yeah, using technology, which is also something super exciting. And now I'd like to pass on actually to Scott, because, well, we're talking about companies and corporations and sustainability goals and everything. And there's a lot of focus on ESG, environmental and social governance at the moment. Everybody's using this buzzword for everything, but really, like, you have a lot of experience speaking with companies about sustainability. So it'd be great to know what have you discovered regarding, well, these ESG goals in your conversations. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So yeah, you're right. What I'm trying to do at Well, That's Interesting Tech is really find those technologies, those leaders, those companies that are trying to change the world for a better place, and they're aligned to the SDGs. So in doing that, I speak a lot with companies about, of all different sizes, from large corporates like BT Group to small startups all over the world. ESG, in my opinion, it's been a welcome development. I mean, we've now seen, a lot of companies moving to follow this tidal wave of ESG investment. And I think, a couple of years ago, I was writing an article about how for corporations to change some of the habits that they have and some of the practices they have. It's going to need to be incentivized financially as well somehow. And it was interesting to hear what Ian was saying as well, how by implementing sustainability within the business, it can actually become its own business case, its own business model. And I think a lot of that is supported and driven and celebrated by the ESG focus. So that's the positive side of it. I have been quite skeptical to start with the ESG thing, because a lot of the people I started to speak with who are now ESG teams, they were originally from CSR, corporate social responsibility, and then they came from similar kind of roles. And in my corporate experience, which has been reasonably varied, CSR was always a bit of lip service in my experience, and I was worried that ESG was going to be just the same thing. So I've been asking people, do you think that ESG is just another one of these things that we need to do? But what I'm hearing actually is from nearly everybody is no, it's not just something we need to do. Yes, we absolutely need to do it, but we need to do it for a different reason. And because we need to do it for those different reasons, we're seeing a lot more people doing exactly what BT Group is doing, which is trying to find those business cases, so that it's not just a line item at a board meeting, but it's something that everybody in the organization is trying to achieve, whether they know it or not, actually. And that's another interesting point. If you build sustainability in throughout the organization carefully, everybody can be doing their work in a way that is actually contributing to the overall sustainability goals. So I guess there's some of the key things that I've picked up on.
Great, Scott. And a follow-up question on that ESG. So you have environment, social and governance. Where do you see more and where do you see less action? Because some of the companies are saying, as you mentioned, they're doing ESG, but some of those three or one of those three might be overlooked or harder to attain. What is your experience with those corporates on that?
So I think there's a huge amount of conversation around climate, so environment. And as I'm looking at, I've got them behind me, the wonderfully colored SDG charts. Environment is just one piece, but an incredibly important piece of it. And I'm actively trying to find those technologies that are not just SDG 13 and other areas as well, because I think there is a tremendous focus on that. And I think Ian, you said this to me a while ago, actually. You said, if you don't get number 13 right, then the rest of it's kind of academic, or it changes fundamentally. So, I think there's naturally at the moment a lot of focus on that. I think on the governance side, there's already been a lot of good work over the last decade or so on that. I'm thinking things to do with Modern Slavery Act, gender pay gap analysis, that kind of thing. But I think there's still more that needs to be done. And then the sustainability bit, I'm not sure how many organizations are really particularly clear about the difference between sustainability and the environmental piece. I think they blur together quite a lot. So that's kind of, as I say, I'm trying to be active around the SDGs to try and find these other things as well to talk about.
Yes, great, Scott. Good to know. And for those in the audience, hopefully you're very into the sustainability world and you know what the SDGs mean, but they are Sustainable Development Goals that were created by the United Nations. So please do check them out. There are 17 and they're super interesting by each of them by their own essence. And Scott, what has put so much focus on your work on these SDGs that, as you mentioned, they're just right behind you, so very passionate about that, I would assume? Yeah,
so I kind of got into the line of work I'm doing right now through kind of many years of personal reflection, and then kind of figuring out, what is it that I can do that is really going to make an impact with my skill sets, with my passions, etc. And it was pulling these ideas together, and I suddenly realized there's a framework for this, and it's called the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I don't think they're perfect. I think they've got lots of flaws, and some of the things that I've been discovering about them is I'm glad you just said if you don't know what the SDGs are, because I was actually absolutely surprised how many people were delivering some of these tech for good applications. Some of these things were actually making really positive impact, but they were completely oblivious to the SDGs. So I think there's an awareness piece there anyway. But that, you know, pulling all those things together, all of these purposeful things together, I put it into, found the framework, and I thought, well, this is as good enough of a framework as I can find. And the thing I love about it is that you can't really pick one and take it away from the others. They're all interlinked somehow. And there's a lovely question, you know, which, if you could only do three, which three would you do? It's quite a challenge to pick three out. So that's why I'm really focused on them. I think they really create good conversation, and they help us focus and create a common language to talk about a better world.
Great to know. Scott, you mentioned that you work with corporates, but you also work with startups. And I'd be curious to hear from both type of clients that you have. What have you found when talking to them about the SDGs? You mentioned that if you don't know, like, do you feel any difference between startups and corporates? Are startups more enlightened about the SDGs because they're more proactive potentially? I don't know, like BTs are proactive, so don't take it personally, Ian. And it's a big corporation, but you know, in general, do you see any difference between big corporates and startups when you're talking to them about the SDGs?
No, that's an interesting question. And actually, I don't think that the difference that I spotted is broken down that easily between the two of them. There's actually been a geography piece. I found that, and this could just be in my kind of biased sampling methodology, but of the companies that I've spoken to over in America, there's much lower awareness of what the SDGs are versus those here in Europe. So particularly, you know, every startup I speak to in Europe is aware of and aligned to the SDGs, but you know, I'm a mentor in an impact incubator, so that kind of would make sense. But yeah, even the startups I spoke to in the US, there's one that's trying to electrify flight, yeah, that's fantastic. Really, some really great environmental positives out of that. But there wasn't really that kind of active awareness. There's a company to do with biomedical devices and health. Again, great stuff in terms of SDG number 3 and some of the others as well. But again, didn't really understand that. Even one to do with HR software that was doing organizational charts. And you know, when I kind of put it together, it's like, oh, great. Well, this can help reduce inequalities. It can help with the gender equality and all of these other. Oh, brilliant, great. So I think it doesn't really break between startups and large corp. The other thing I found interesting was I had a couple of people tell me, well, yeah, okay, that's all very well, but it's very political. I don't think we should align to it because it's very political. And that was a bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah, I'm surprised as well about that. First time I hear about it. I don't know if you want to develop more on that, or maybe at the end, that part of the.
I mean, it'd be interesting to hear from the other panelists if they've ever heard of that comment. I mean, this person justified it by saying, well, it's very. Actually, one of the things came up. It came up from the question around, you know, why split life on land and life under the sea? Why not combine those? Why are they split? And this person was arguing, well, you need to look at the industries that were involved in creating the SDGs to understand the reasons why these were split into the segments they are. They're very industry driven. So anyway, I mean, I won't go into that in any more, but I'd love to hear from others if they've heard similar comments.
Great. Does anyone want to add to this at this moment? Okay.
I don't think I've necessarily heard the political side of it. I do, though, have potentially some qualms about the SDGs, or maybe not about the SDGs themselves, but the way that they're used. So if you think of climate, it's this system, and we know what we've got to do. We've got to get to zero by 2050, zero carbon emissions by 2050. And we know what we've got to do. And you can look at that and you can segment it out into, okay, so you're doing this and you've got to get to zero, and it's very clear, it's very, like, you can understand it, and it's systematic, so you can see all of that. Whereas sometimes the SDGs can be used in a way that's way less systematic. So it's like, oh, I employed a woman in my company last week, so I'm really talking to that gender equality SDG, or I spoke to government, so in partnershiping for the goals, and actually the kind of measurements and the systematic level of what you're doing to achieve those goals, I think that's almost sometimes lacking. Like as Ian talked about with the with science-based targets, for some of the environmental SDGs, there are the planetary boundaries that give you a measure and a scientific measure that's can be quite challenging. If you compare carbon emitted in the UK is equal to carbon emitted in China and Australia and everywhere else, whereas if you start to look at land use and water use, segmenting that out fairly is quite challenging. And then if you go, so science-based targets for those are very difficult. And then if you go kind of one step further to really quite difficult to measure SDGs, such as the social ones, I think that's the level of systematicness to know how much you've done and how much is enough can be challenging. And that's where I think my qualms maybe lie more with how they're used rather than how they're set up.
That's a good point, Martina.
No, I would say, I think there's something that I try to be very mindful of when I speak to these companies about that, and that is that term greenwashing. Somebody referred to it a little bit more broadly last week, called it purpose washing. So, wherever there's a use, there's an abuse, and I think we need to be careful not to abuse these things and use them in the wrong way. And that's one of the reasons I say that I don't think they're perfect, but for me, they give me a really good framework and a way to discuss things in the vocabulary.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, just one last thing, I think sometimes it talks to the people, planet, profit model as well, which was sort of withdrawn by its developer at one stage, because people, planet, profit also can be abused almost, where if you say, so I once worked in a company where someone said, oh, it's profitable, it helps the planet, and they had some kind of claims around that, and people want it. So it's a people, planet, profit business model, which isn't necessarily what the people part of people, planet, profit is about. It's about not the people who are buying the product who might want it. It's just everyone involved in making the product, creating the product, and producing the product. So, and who's impacted by all of those things happening as well, even if they're not directly involved in that supply chain. So, yeah, I think systematicness of what these achieve is key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. You know what you're talking about because you focus a lot on supply chains, Martina, with your work. So it's good to hear from your perspective on that. So we're about 12 minutes away from potentially at the end, but we can extend a bit more. It would be great if the audience, if you want to ask questions, feel free to use Sli.do. We'll be happy, and the panelists will be happy to answer your questions. So feel free to be active there. And now that we're mentioning the SDGs, and one of the ones that Scott mentioned was good health and well-being, it'd be great to hear from Carl now and hear, his thoughts about this SDG, the technologies that are revolving around it, and how can good health and well-being become part of those SDGs and using technology to get to those goals.
Yeah. As you mentioned, I spend a lot of time working with healthcare and well-being related companies. And I think, a key theme associated with the evolution of healthcare is about reducing inequalities or increasing access to healthcare. And as I'm sure lots of us have noticed, the rise of telehealth providers like Babylon, Doctor, Push Doctor, etc., etc. The types of companies that a year ago actually enabled primary care to sort of keep functioning when brick and mortar clinics were closed down. These type of companies enable people to get access to doctors at any time from anywhere. And that's definitely reducing barriers to access to healthcare. But it's about so much more than just telehealth providers. I think a very topical subject at the moment is mental health and the problems within the provision, or problems within the diagnosis and then the provision of therapy for mental health care historically. Digital solutions focused on the mental health care, on the mental health space, are massively bringing down barriers to access there, because historically wait times have been very long within the NHS to be able to even see a therapist. And once you get a time to see a therapist, not everyone can take time off work, and sometimes have to travel quite substantial distances to be able to attend. And then there's been a stigma associated with physically going to see a doctor. But digital solutions are able to solve all of these issues. You can remotely diagnose and treat various mental health related conditions. People can do it at a time that is convenient for them. If they feel stigmatized, they can do it without anyone having to see or notice it. But I think the general democratization of mental health care provision is actually reducing the stigma associated with getting treatment at the same time. So there are lots of things that startups that we're working with are doing to reduce inequalities within the broader healthcare space. But I think technical innovation has a role to play in other parts of the healthcare ecosystem. It's not just about remote patient monitoring and remote treatment, which is of course great, but it's also about reducing inefficiencies, making sure that healthcare systems that are generally extremely overstretched because of the fact that the global population is in general living much longer, while at the same time suffering from more chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, etc., etc. The old way of doing things isn't sustainable. So in order to be more sustainable, one has to look at alternatives, some of which I've mentioned. But then but within that is making the process of drug development more efficient. This is generally a process that takes years and years to develop a novel drug. But with the power of AI or machine learning based solutions to increase the speed of new drug development, that drives efficiencies, etc. So I suppose that was a rather long-winded way of saying that technology can offer a lot of benefits to making healthcare systems in general more sustainable.
It's interesting that, as Scott was mentioning, like all the SDGs, well, not all, but like many of them are interconnected. So as you're tackling good health and well-being with these technologies, you're also touching the part of reducing inequalities on the SDGs and many others. So it's great to see all these interconnections. And again, as Scott mentioned, it's hard to pick just one that a company or a project or a product is having impact on. There are several, so it's good to know that about these relationships. And especially now with COVID and everything going more remote and everything, I'm sure that you've seen super interesting projects and companies and startups popping up to actually address new things that weren't there. So basically new problems at a faster pace than if we weren't for COVID. So it'd be great to also to know from you, Carl, that you're on the investor side of things, right? So as you mentioned, you need some financing to development of drugs because they take years and years and they're very costly. It'd be great to hear from you also if there's anything in particular that investors are looking for besides return on investment when you're evaluating these impactful startups.
Sure. So, as in general, impact investors that we talk to and we agree, that in general, there doesn't necessarily need to be a trade-off between financial return and impact. The two of them can instead be sort of mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. So investors are going to look at the typical things that mainstream investors also look at, which is viable product, a big market to go after, a great team, and those bits and pieces. So all of those things need to sort of be pitched and positioned and explained, but they will also, and this gets back to the discussion Martina and Scott were having earlier, they will also want to see that, they will also want to understand what the impact is. How does this impactful business plan to deliver impact? Who is a beneficiary of this impact? And how do they plan to monitor the impact and the good things that they're doing? And as a result of that, they can very quickly see through founders or businesses who say they are doing something sustainable or impactful when they're actually not. So mispositioning or greenwashing is not a good idea. But that's, the same goes for anything else. Don't tell people you're something that you're not. I think being able to show a solid plan of how you are going to deliver impact, who's going to benefit from it, and how you're going to measure it is key for investors to be able to understand.
Thank you, Carl. And we're almost running out of time, so I will still want to hear from all the panelists, and potentially in a shorter answer. But what are the trends that you're seeing, in your area of work? So we have different areas here that are represented: renewable energy, mobility, EVs, telecoms, healthcare, and corporate sustainability. So can you, succinctly say, each of you, what do you think are the trends in sustainability that are happening specifically in your sector? And we can start, let's say, with Scott.
Okay, so I am pleased to say that I think I'm seeing an increased awareness and understanding that, as Greta Thunberg said, you're not too small to make a difference, or as the Dalai Lama said, if you ever think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. So I think I'm seeing that, an increased awareness and realization that people individually can make small incremental steps.
Thank you. Julie, you want to go next?
Sure. So I think what we've seen across energy is a few things. One, particularly in the UK, we've seen the kind of real breakup of the big six, where there was just such a hostile environment for competition, and we've seen that break down now. We've got lots of challenger green energy suppliers coming into the market, and people will make that choice when they're choosing their energy supplier to go green. And we're seeing more kind of green tariffs across the industry as a result. So that's massively encouraging. And yeah, I think in terms of kind of what we need to do to kind of help people make these choices is just kind of make it, give them the tools they need to be able to make those choices. So kind of seeing competitive energy markets emerging as well in across the kind of different countries, so that people can make that choice to go renewable.
Thanks, Julie. That's great to see. There's more choice. The market is opening, and people can decide on their own and select the right energy providers. Besides being more clean, they're also renewable. More clean, they're also cheaper. So that's great. Ian, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think so. IoT, I think, is going to be really important. It's still fairly nascent in a lot of situations, and I think there's two elements to it which I find interesting. One is that you can use IoT and the data to measure business performance, energy, etc., and kind of using the AI around it. But it's also got a huge role in terms of measuring climate impact, so using it from an air quality monitoring perspective, water monitoring. And I think, you know, that idea of essentially connecting more and more things to get more and more data than using the right level of computing to get that analysis is super critical. And so I think, you know, that there is so much that can happen. And I think, you know, that there's, you know, already people talking about, you know, we're entering the age of sustainability innovation. And I think, you know, we are probably, you know, the digital world is almost, we're in it now, but I think this world of sustainable innovation and the sustainability being the key driver of what we need to be doing across the planet is kind of, I think, what I find most exciting from a technological perspective.
Definitely, well said, Ian. Martina, would you like to go next?
Yeah, of course. So in transportation, definitely seeing this rise of e-commerce. So lots of Amazon delivery vans seen on the street, and what that looks like for cities. So really that focus on reducing those the emissions of those vehicles to zero. Also, this kind of trend of increased urbanization and increased car ownership. We're sort of seeing increased urbanization just carry on. But the increased car ownership is really like, you know, that trend is dropping, and fewer and fewer people, particularly sort of the millennial era, are buying cars. People want access to reliable, affordable transport, and that's not necessarily owning a car. So yeah, looking at mobility within cities, and the shift towards shared mobility solutions like ride hailing, and making those really accessible. On a more sort of personal level, or just things that I've noticed in my day-to-day role when I'm talking to people in the sustainability area, they're busier than ever. It feels like people are can't hire sustainability professionals fast enough. It just feels like there's been a real big shift maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, and particularly accelerated now. So a really exciting time to be in sustainability.
Great, Martina, thank you very much. And Carl, over to you.
Yes, so I mean, one huge trend, of course, is that this awful pandemic that we've all lived through has really accelerated the acceptance of digital healthcare solutions. Adoption moves slower than acceptance within healthcare because, as opposed to many other industries in which startups are active, the consequences within healthcare of something not working can be very serious. So, I mean, it takes time. It needs to move with the regulatory frameworks and so on and so forth. But I mean, the mindset shift has happened. The brick wall has sort of come down to a certain extent, and that digital health care related solutions are going to keep taking sort of market share, if you want to call it that.
Great, Carl. Thank you. Thank you all. I have a few more questions from the audience, so I'll ask them now. And actually, Carl, the first one is for you. And there's someone in the audience asking for what changes have you seen in sustainable healthcare solutions with regards to what investors are interested in investing in?
I think there are two big picture here now. There are two groups of investors interested in healthcare. They're the ones who, have can take that long-term view of investing in a business, a long time before they're going to see proper revenues come. So companies that are deep tech, if you want to call it that have to do multiple clinical trials, go through multiple regulatory hurdles before they can be properly adopted and start generating revenues. Then you have the other bucket of investors who are more comfortable investing into consumer-focused products or solutions. So that could be anything from wellness apps to fitness trackers to all sorts of things, which if executed well can generate revenues quicker. So I think it's important to consider in which of those two types of buckets you position yourself.
Yeah, I think actually just to add to that, Carl, one of the things I've seen is that blurring between the wellness and the healthcare, and the worry about data safety, privacy, and kind of what role regulation needs to play in those applications moving forward. So I think there's a lot of work going on in those areas, and I'm keen to see how that develops, so that all of this good that we're getting from these applications and devices and stuff like that doesn't end up somehow becoming misused and abused.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there, Scott. I mean, it's nearly that there should be a term called health washing instead of greenwashing. But I mean, it's within healthcare, it is very important that stuff works, that people get the care that they need, because otherwise, we're talking about ethical issues, in my view.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So let's move on to the last question from the audience and from the panel today, because we're already past time. And basically, the UK has very ambitious net zero targets by 2050, as you know. And the question from the audience is that how positive are you in the industry and economy achieving that net zero by 2050? So how do you see the UK going towards that goal, or do you think it's not achievable? And feel free, whoever wants to ask, feel free to answer, feel free to start talking.
Oh, well, I'll go first. I don't think it's not going to be easy, but it is achievable. I think perhaps we probably need to be a little bit more realistic than John Kerry was recently around things magically appearing, helping us along the way. But I think, a couple of things to me that needs to change is that essentially it's got to become something that's understood across every individual and across every business. I think it's very hard for a lot of SMEs and a lot of people to actually understand what it is that they can do in relation to climate action. They don't know where to start. So I think there's going to need to be a lot of support from governments, and the role of big businesses and any business in this space is important to help drive that. But I think there's also going to be need for regulation to help drive action as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of levers that need to get pulled. But overall, I'm a massive tech optimist and an optimist in general. So I firmly believe we can do it. It's just that we've all got to collaborate, work together, and it's just let's stop working until we get there.
Okay, so let me jump in then. So I think I'm generally optimistic because I've seen an increase or overcoming the inertia and an increase in momentum. However, I'm also cautiously skeptical, and I worry that the closer we get to the numbers, if we don't have the right frameworks, we don't have the right measurements in place, everything we talked about today really, people will find a way to achieve the targets maybe less ingenuously. So I heard one CEO of a large organization say that his job is like a parachutist jumping out of an aeroplane. He has to hit the X on the floor, and he has a lever here and a lever here, and his job at the end of the quarter is to pull one lever harder than the other, and one is cost and one is expenditure. And I think if we all get closer and closer to that 2050, there will be seeing a lot of pulling on one side, which will hit the target, but maybe not the right way.
Yeah, I think it was similar to Scott. I'm optimistic, but also cautiously skeptical. I think that's a good way of describing it. I think the UK has a really good chance of meeting those 2050 goals. But I think what we need to be quite careful of is making sure that we are also looking at this as a global problem. So where the UK maybe doesn't have as much sort of raw material manufacturing as it might have had in the past. So aluminium, steel, cement supply chains. We've also got to look at those almost imported emissions of materials that we use. So I think making sure that we're looking at this as a global problem as well as a UK-based problem. And I think the other thing is that really hammer home a focus on carbon reductions. Carbon reductions are incredibly important. So instead of all the net zero net zero promises, which may or may not require many offsets. Where are those offsets coming from? I think I'd like to see a much greater focus on as a company, people going out and saying this is the reductions portion of what we're going to do by X date, and then being very clear on where the offsets are coming from as well. So looking at that as two different things, a reduction strategy and a net zero target. And then I think we need to really have that supported by solid disclosure as well, written into regulation. So a few things to go at, but cautiously optimistic.
I think I would say I'm a lot more optimistic recently than I have been in a long time, because I think one of the incredible things that we've seen over the last year is how much people will change their habits given the right incentive. So I'm so pleased to see people kind of going, remote working is possible. We don't all need to live within commuting distance of the city. You can go into work maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and the company doesn't grind to a halt. So just like seeing a lever big enough that we change our habits is really encouraging, and seeing more kind of acceptance that everybody's circumstances are different, everybody's got the ability to do different things, and understanding that that presents opportunities in all sorts of different ways. So whether it's Internet of Things, engaging with people's kind of love of automation and making things that work by magic, or whether it's gamification and trying to encourage people to do better than they did yesterday, all these sorts of different levers that you can pull with people. And just trying to motivate them to do their bit is such a better conversation than I remember when I was a child, where it was, it all has to come from government, or it all has to come from the big businesses. And these are important things. We do need the regulation. We do need the businesses to be putting forward realistic and actionable plans. But also we need everybody on board so that they're buying services that are sustainable and they are thinking about their part in everything. And yeah, I've seen a lot more of that in the last few years than I had previously. So I'm more optimistic today.
And I agree with what the other panelists have been saying. I personally, I'm cautiously optimistic as well. I think I'm basing a lot of that on the behavior that I'm seeing from ClearlySo's clients, customers who are proving that they want to live, they want to buy, they want to live more sustainably. And I think in a long term, that's only going to increase.
Great, thank you everyone for your answers. I like that they were also connected to your work in any case, but you see clearly, but like a trend towards that net 2050. But of course, we have to be cautious and really want to get there and put policies and regulations and leadership in place to get there. We've more than passed the time, as you know, so I would like to close up the discussion. Thank you all the panelists here. Thank you all for coming and giving your views in these different areas of sustainability and how tech drives innovation around sustainability. And I would also like to thank all the attendees, and thank you for your questions. Great to have you engaged, and I look forward to see you the next time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.